Hi.
Welcome to EduVue on the EdReach Network with show 29 in our second season. We feature a panel of experts with a purpose to professionally and critically discuss and assess the current trends and topics in education and technology.
Tonight we are joined by, of course, yours truly and our regular panelists, but we also are featuring Dr. Chris Kraft. Yay!
Yay! He's back.
But before we welcome Chris, we want to remind you that you can find EduVue on YouTube, iTunes, and the EdReach Network, where all of our shows are available. We'd love to be a more frequent presence in your ear, especially if you can't make our live shows.
And of course, we love our back channels. Make sure that you're following us on Google Plus and on Twitter, hashtag EduVue. Make sure that you send in all of your questions tonight via the Q&A feature on our Google Plus event page. And also, any questions you might have, put those on the back channel on Twitter, and we will get to them as we can.
Chris, thank you so much for being here. So please take a moment for our people watching to introduce yourself. So tell us what you are, or who you are, and what you do.
So delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. It's also a pleasure to be back with you. I was thrilled to have been a guest on the show before. Always a delight to hang out with you all. First and foremost, I'm a big fan of yours. So thanks again for your time. I'm Chris Kraft. I'm fortunate to get the opportunity to teach kids Introduction to STEM at a public middle school in Columbia, South Carolina. I work with sixth graders, which are absolutely wonderful kids, and I'm fortunate to be able to teach some of the greatest kids in the state of South Carolina. Really supportive administration, really supportive faculty at the school, really fired up about STEM. I've been teaching STEM for about 3 years now, and I've kind of gotten into STEM. I kind of fell into it in a bit of an odd way. I'm certified K-12 Spanish, and have that was my world. I speak Spanish, and that was my I majored in it in my undergraduate. But when I started teaching, technology use came somewhat naturally because I'm very kind of intrinsically geeky anyway. So I kind of fell into, hey, we need a new exploratory class at the school. Hey, you seem to really like sort of different technologies. Would you like to teach, this type of class, which then morphed into an introduction to STEM class. And it's been really well received, and we have a great time.
That's awesome.
I know, right? The fact that you actually have an intro to STEM class is fascinating.
We have one of our middle schools I know, and we have 5 middle schools in our district, but I'm only really affiliated with one of them so much, the one that I taught at. They are going to do a lot of STEM stuff coming up in this next year, which leads really well into their feeder high school, which has a really strong career and technical education program. So that's exciting. I'm interested to hear more about what you're doing at the middle school level, Chris.
Yeah, definitely. Can you go over the curriculum, like how it was developed, or did you just kind of do it all yourself?
Because I am the intro to STEM teacher at our school, it was a very sit down at a coffee shop with a napkin type of curricular development process, and it was a lot of who do I know that's doing this. So I reached out to incredible people. Like as I was thinking about the space, I reached out to my good friend, colleague, and dare I say mentor, David Jakes, and I said, what do I do with this space? And he said, no, that's the wrong question to ask, and I'll let him explain that conversation to you when he's back on your show.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned David, because he's already tweeted me saying, how come you got a graphic? And he didn't. So I told him, since having him on the show, he inspired us so much, we had to step up our game.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And truth be told, I would say the same thing about his influence on my life and practice. But so I reached out to him and I said, what do I do with the space? And we talked through, it's not about what you do with the space, it's about what you want kids to learn, and it's about where you feel like that experience is going to go. So I began to think critically about the space, and I began to think critically about, what does this space say to kids as they walk in the door about the expectations. And then I began to think about, is it going to be project-based, or is it going to be problem-based, and is it going to be a well-structured problem or an ill-structured problem? And, Cindy Jimello-Silver has done some fantastic work along those lines, and some of my graduate research was in problem-based learning, and I began thinking through that, and I reached out to guys like the absolutely amazing Brian Crosby out in Nevada, who is now a STEM coordinator. Of course, was a 5th grade teacher for years and years. Now is a STEM coordinator. Reached out to him and I said, "What do I do?" And he gave me some wise advice and counsel and project ideas, and I reached out to some friends that kind of ran companies that I think have really neat STEM products. And I said, hey, do you feel like there's a place for what you're, creating in our world? And I met some really neat, like I met the folks at Lego Robotics, and I said, this is a good place for us to start. And I met some just really great folks like that. So I tried to take a real diverse series of influences, both from personal connections in maybe you call it my PLN, as well as some corporate world, because they have an interesting perspective on STEM, as well as I tried to take a research-based approach. My major professor in my doctoral studies is now the head, kind of the STEM guy at the University of Utah. He just recently launched the STEM. It's a S2EM, so STEM Center for Excellence at the University of Utah. It's a statewide initiative in conjunction with the University of Utah. Tremendous work. His name is Dr. David Feldon. Absolutely amazing, amazing guy, amazing researcher, and a dear friend. So I reached out to him and I said, in broad spectrum, what is the kind of the research? What is it saying about STEM? And then I've been fortunate to connect with some folks at the NSF. Just last week I was at the White House talking to the Office of Science and Technology Policy about STEM education and their Maker Fair that they're hoping to host, and I was fortunate to be part of that program, and actually got to see the president, so very briefly, and as he was getting on his Marine One. But anyway, so lots of diverse opinions, lots of people that I'm fortunate to know, and lots of reading and lots of soul searching. And I wouldn't agree that the curriculum has been developed. I would argue that it's kind of being developed because it's constantly being tweaked as a kind of as the ebb and flow of natural curricular process goes. But in addition, as a result of student interest, passion, and just general kind of the way schooling goes.
Awesome.
Amy, nice talking.
All right, honey.
All right, well, they were discussing about doing hot topics at the end, but I think we should go ahead and do them now since we're, kind of getting the ball rolling. So, does anybody have any hot topics they'd like to share?
I'll go.
Okay, go.
So, I know that we all were a part of last year's GAETC, I believe. Oh, Stacia, were you out? You were out.
No, I wasn't there, yeah.
You weren't there. Well, here's your chance, Stacia. It's coming back around. So GAETC has now opened up all of our applications for concurrent sessions, workshops, and student showcases. So now is your time. Get those sessions in. Definitely put your mind to it. Make our workshop committee bust their hiney. That's my job, is to get so many people to submit that they're busy little beavers. One of which is Kate, and she's not here yet. But let's keep Kate busy. Let's give her something to do. So make sure.
It's so funny though, because when this came around last year, I couldn't imagine what I wanted to do, and I spent all summer thinking about it. And I didn't do my proposal until probably the end of August, because what I might want to do now could completely change between now and October.
Oh, I agree. But yes, it's a tough one. The problem was last year we did have a little tiny glitch in which our website went down a little earlier than anticipated, and we apparently lots and lots of people like to wait to the very last seconds to submit proposals. And so as the social media chair, you can imagine that all those people who did not get their proposals in on time took to social media to let me know. So I'm encouraging everybody to do this early. Get started early. Definitely workshops. If you have a really good idea that would be good for a small group that's hands-on, that's maybe STEM-based, we're really looking for fresh, inventive ideas for workshops, because they're there's great potential there, and it's much smaller. Workshops span a few hours, and so definitely start thinking about what it is you might be able to submit for a workshop or a concurrent session. And student showcases as well. We want to see students at GAETC this year. So follow at GAETC Conf, C-O-N-F, on Twitter. We're also on Facebook, and make sure you stay up to date with all those deadlines and stay ahead of those deadlines. Thank
And
you, social
don't forget, we have a very special featured speaker.
Ah, yes.
GAETC. I wonder who that would be.
I don't know who is that.
Drum roll. Chris Kraft!
I know. We can't forget that at all. He was there last year, and it was incredible. You had such a huge turnout because you just have so much to add, and everybody loves how you speak and what you have to say.
The rooms weren't big enough for
No, they
him.
were not.
Like, this year they'll be like, okay, where are we going to put him? Because last year the rooms were just not big enough to keep the people in that wanted to see Chris. So
I appreciate it.
I have to do an overflow room with some streaming.
Yeah, overflow room with streaming.
Yeah.
We should do that. We should definitely do that. We really do need to have Chris Kraft pom-poms. We really do.
we'll work on this.
Oh, Lord. David Jakes is going to get us.
Is David coming to GAETC?
Mm.
Gonna have to talk to him.
He does like Atlanta.
He does. Hey, he's a UGA. He's a dog. So he should come.
A Georgia dog, that is. Let's clarify.
Oh,
For our
sorry.
watchers who may not know.
For the people who are not in the SEC, I get it. Of course, Chris is not a dog, but we won't. We'll talk about that later. All right, Amy, do you have something to share?
Hey, friends, there's 9 days of school left. And I have finally been released from standardized and other end-of-the-year testing, so I can teach technology again.
Yeah.
You mean the kids still want to learn? 9 days left? They're not checked out?
No, they're not interested at all. But they are. They are having a good time. I can't even tell you what I did today. That's how crazy the day was. It was long, and but my little first graders did write poems at the end of the day with Tuxedo and one from Read, Write, Think that was totally like their speed. But then some of the higher level kids could go on. Anyway, that was what I did with the first grade today. And our gifted teachers just purchased 2 Makey-Makeys, and I'm so excited for them, except for I have 9 days left to work with them because both of my gifted teachers are moving to different schools next year, so that makes me super sad. So now I have to put them on my wish list so I can get them in my classroom. That's my goal for next year, just to have some more hands-on tech rather than just my web-based tech.
Well, Chris kind of already blew one of the things I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about Chris Kraft at the White House. But he's already kind of blown that. But it was only 20 teachers, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. And that's just amazing. And it's such a small world because you had a colleague of mine there as well.
True statement, Alex Bragg.
I know. She's wonderful.
Wow.
And so do you what exactly did you guys... Were there any interesting things at all that you guys actually talked about? Because I know that Arnie Duncan did show up for just a little bit.
We did. So we were fortunate to get the opportunity to spend time. Not only, I think some of the best conversations were among ourselves. We met, several of us met for breakfast in the morning, and we began the conversation that way, much like you would at any kind of small or intimate event. So we began the conversation early in the morning. Quick little White House tour. President. We get to see him leave on Marine One, and then we began our conversations with Arnie Duncan. And as you could imagine, in any political scenario, there was touting of education initiatives and some positive things that have happened. And I don't discount that at all. He was very excited that the graduation rate has increased to, in his words, 80%. They're pushing for 100. So there's still some work to be done. And certainly he addressed a few of our challenges, and he had some really nice words to say about those that might be interested in education. He seems to firmly believe that education is a noble career and a noble career path. Some of us were probably a little bewildered by the whole experience, and I don't know that I was quite so open with what I might have wanted to say in that opportunity. But in retrospect, it was a neat opportunity. Now, where I feel like the real meat of the day was in the conversations with, we met with lots of the deputy directors. We met with somebody from the First Lady's office, and we had the opportunity to talk to her, not the First Lady directly, but some folks from her office about their Reach Higher initiative, which was a lot of fun, and then a couple of other deputy directors. But bringing this back to STEM is, I had actually asked to meet with the folks behind, I'm going to put it in the chat, and then you guys can potentially broadcast it more broadly. It's at White House OSTP. OSTP stands for Office of Science and Technology Policy. I met a gentleman by the name of Kumar Garg, and he was talking about that in 2014, sometime later this year, my guess would be late fall, the White House is going to host a maker fair. And I knew this, or at least I had heard ruminations of it. So when he walked in, I was like, "This is the guy. Like, this is what this is who I've been waiting to talk to. This is what I've been waiting to talk about." So he gave his couple of minutes of spiel, and he's like, "Anybody have any questions?" And it was, I pounded the table kind of by accident, shocked everyone a little bit, and raised my hand as high as I possibly could have. And I was like, I would have talked to you. And then, I talked for a couple minutes about, I'm fired up about maker education. I'm fired up about STEM, and I was a little jacked in the moment. So he was well receiving of my overly enthusiastic STEM thoughts. So hopefully, if I'm lucky, I'll get the opportunity to help with the White House Maker Fair and perhaps even participate with a couple of my students.
That would be absolutely awesome.
Yeah, for you and your students. That would be amazing. Yeah. Well, let's see. Any ISTE news? Chris, will you be at ISTE?
I will be at ISTE. Mm-hmm.
Yay! Are you presenting anything?
I am. I'll be presenting a poster session on, it's a Google poster session on technical deployments. I'll be presenting that, and I'll also be hosting, so I'll announce this somewhat broadly. It's going to be a ticketed event, so if you're interested in attending, please reach out to me. Reach out to me by Twitter or email or Facebook if we're Facebook friends or whatever. I'm going to be hosting a make shop where instead of a workshop, it's a make shop. My friends over at Hummingbird that make a really terrific kit that, yeah, Kat, you know about the Hummingbird, and it's a really neat electronics. It's kind of a combination of electronics and animatronics, where you get a controller, and then you get servos and motors and a rotary knob, and you get regular LEDs and tricolor LEDs. You get all of this, and you get this really neat visual programmer, and it allows you to essentially create animatronics. So a real neat project that some kids in another state did is they animated Robert Frost's Fire and Ice.
Oh, wow.
So
wow.
In reading through the work, certain things happen at different parts. So when they talk about fire, like, they did it out of cardboard, so a piece of cardboard flips around based on a servo, and fire is displayed, and at another point ice is displayed, and they have a kind of Rube Goldberg aspect to it. It's really neat. We used the kit just a couple of days ago, and we built an automated blind opener to open and close the mini blinds as a result of whether it's hot or cold in the room.
Oh, wow.
So as the temperature sensor reaches a certain degrees, I don't remember what the kid said it at, the blinds will kind of naturally open if it's cold in the room to warm it up a little bit, or they'll shut if it's warm in the room to prevent the extra heat from coming in. So real problems, real solutions.
Oh gosh, I wish I had the time to do this kind of stuff. Like, I have a Hummingbird, and we just got over our AP test, and so we're actually just we made a vocab list to kind of go with maker kind of material, just in Spanish right now. So just something that we could contribute to that, but we haven't been able to do tons with it because we're not a STEM class like the kind of things that you have. Okay, before we get into that, you want to talk about iSummit, Stacia? And then I'm going to get into
to keep the conversation, so I'll go back to iSummit later, but kind of like you, Kat, we have the Hummingbird too, thanks to Chris. Mm-hmm. And I know, like, crafty. Thanks to Chris. And I just feel like I didn't have enough time to really explore, Chris, so I wanted to ask you, can we go ahead and jump into conversation?
Yeah, totally.
So, Chris, you're a Spanish teacher. Like, you do so many great things, but how have you really gotten into this techie thing? Like, you are so inundated into it, and I think that would be great for teachers who aren't techie to kind of know, like, how did you find your way?
Let's back up for just a second, and let me just revert back to Jake's for just a moment, and then I'll come back around to this conversation. One of the things that he said some time ago was it's not about taking the computer lab and making it a maker space, because that's I think a current trend. A lot of people are considering replacing their computer labs with maker spaces, and I certainly understand that there is a need for a physical location for some of the larger machinery. If you're going to do CNC milling or any type of bending, or just large machinery has to go somewhere. So I understand that necessity, But I also understand that his desire, and I would agree with him, that it needs to be more of a culture of making. So I would almost gently push back, Kat, when you say that, yes, I know AP is huge. Yes, I know that there are lots of demands on your time and mine, and State should answer your question. I would almost kind of wonder if we have time not to think through this. So the way that I begin is by thinking through how I would use it personally. So I think through it from a personal play standpoint, right? So if we agree that kind of play is the job of younger children, and certainly older kids, why is it that we as adults tend to lose that natural curiosity and that natural inquiry? Why are we so beholden to the tyranny of the urgent, right? Why do we not carve out? So I calendar in time to just enjoy, and I calendar in time to make, and I calendar in time to learn, because if I'm to learn, if we want our kids to be a lifelong learner, please forgive me, if we want our kids to be a lifelong learner, what right do I have not to be?
Amen.
I love it.
If we agree that we're to model what we want for our kids, why does that stop when they graduate high school or college? So I think we have to build that time in. So I know that AP tests are critical. I understand that. But if we, and that's just, I'm just using your example because we're talking here, but I understand that the tyranny of the urgent is a critical issue. And that's a very big cultural one that none of us are going to fix here on this show tonight. So what I do is I involve my own kids, my children here at the house. The very first people to ever put their hands on pretty much any new technology are my children. And it's just here, give it a shot and let's see what this does. And then I connect with really great people. So kind of piece 2 to this, and how to get started to directly answer your question, Stacia, is find really great people that know and talk. So if we're already in this world of social media, if we're already tweeting and we're already Facebooking and we're already looking at the Pinterest perfection and kind of all of these, if we're doing that already, then why not begin to really cultivate and curate a network of people that are, I like to find people that are smarter than me. I like to find people that know more about a certain topic than I do, which is a lot of people, and I love those folks because I get to learn from them. And I am an unashamed question asker. I am forever posting in maker forums, and I'm learning, and I'm asking, and that's how I learn.
Awesome.
Now, Chris, I think, and this is, I'm so sorry about my crazy cough voice here. I think that middle school teachers have a little bit of a luxury, just in my experience of being in both high schools where you have classes like AP, which have a very rigorous schedule, excuse me, and being in elementary schools where, again, there's this really very structured curriculum mapping going on. The middle school teachers have a little bit more flexibility about how they get to the end. Do you agree with that? And do you think that that helps you in making this time in your class? And are you still teaching Spanish, or is that your class is just STEM?
My classes are just STEM now,
okay.
But I would agree. I personally have a good bit of leeway because I teach an exploratory class.
Yes.
But bear in mind also that I'm fortunate to get the chance to work with teachers all around the world through conferences and closer work. So in a lot of schools and districts that I go into that want to talk more deeply about STEM, one of the first things that we'll do is we'll take a look at kind of where they are with STEM. And by the way, I feel like I need to address this real quick. I tend to use STEM and STEAM as being synonymous. I'm not intentionally leaving out the A. That's more habitual than it is anything else. As evidenced by my fire and ice discussion earlier, that's a very kind of inherently STEAM-related topic. So please don't I don't want you guys to get a bunch of emails because Chris Kraft is he neglects the arts.
Leaving out the arts.
In fact, I was at my daughter's delightful orchestra concert tonight. But anyway, so that said, I get a chance to work with a lot of people that are interested in increasing their what I call their STEM ability. and one of that's across the board, and I would say that it's more a personal disposition than it is a circumstantial one. Mm-hmm. My mom taught high school math for 35 years. That's probably a difficult scenario to bring in a high degree of making. However, if we trace back to our graduate days when we talked about things like universal design for learning,
yes.
or we talked about, there are lots of great opportunities. If we talk about like multiple means of representation, for example, there are lots of ways to build STEM in. STEM doesn't have to be exclusively bringing in as a bringing into the high school calculus class as a hands-on project in class. Maybe there's not the opportunity for that, but maybe there is the opportunity for, let's talk about how certain waves work, and we can see that reflected in an air, water bottle launching, or just take, I don't know, something simple like Diet Coke and Mentos. Let's do that with a slow motion camera, and let's analyze a real authentic opportunity to really do that. And let's talk about the arc that creates as it relates to real world opportunities in our class.
And then I guess my other question for you is, what's kind of your general thought on, several years ago, they just kind of all of a sudden all of the technology classes, and I'm not using technologies and computers, but like all the like industrial arts and all those sorts of classes just kind of disappeared. And now through STEM, we're bringing back a lot of those same activities. What are your thoughts about that?
I kind of see STEM as a way to, and by the way, we should back up for just a second. STEM really shouldn't be a thing. STEM shouldn't be an acronym at all.
Neither should project-based learning. But here we are.
But if you look very carefully at STEM, now we'll just ignore the T and the E for a second, but look at the S and the M. They have very distinct epistemological backgrounds. Science, you begin in, and this is all due credit to David Feldman but you start a science experiment, and if the result doesn't turn out the way you think it should, then potentially you've lended support to the null hypothesis, or potentially your hypothesis was completely wrong, or maybe there was some kind of cataclysmic reaction that you just weren't expecting, and you begin looking through, you go, well, what happened? Something happened here, be it phenomenological, or you're expanding. No experiment is ever wasted provided it's replicable and done well. But on the math side, there's a very different epistemological background, because there is an objective right or wrong to that problem. So if the question is, if the answer is wrong, then that math teacher is going to trace back to those steps and see exactly where that kid went wrong. So STEM as a moniker really kind of shouldn't be a thing. Maybe we could call it project-based learning. Maybe we call it problem-based learning. For better or for worse, STEM is a thing. Now, all of that said, I kind of see STEM as the perfect coalescing of all of those classes that disappeared. And I kind of wonder if they didn't disappear because they were lacking something. I can remember, I'll be 37. In fact, birthday's tomorrow. I'll be 37 tomorrow.
Oh, happy birthday.
See what I did there? Thank you. So, I can remember when I was growing up, I took woodshop class, and I felt like that was really beneficial. And I learned to, measure twice and cut once, and lots of life skills that have taken me through 37 years of life. Maybe 25. Let's say I was 12 when I took that class, and I took typing, and then I took all of these little interesting voc tech style classes, and I kind of really feel like STEM is all of that balled up into one. And if I'm right, and who knows, if I'm right, having STEM as this neat little ball of all of that will lead kids towards a life of being able to critically analyze, a real problem that exists and a real solution. Another little something we just built, we used a neat kit called the Little Bits. If you haven't seen the Little Bits, it's absolutely just delightful. We built a couple of my kids, one child, her grandfather is really hard of hearing. And there are times when, bless his heart, he can't hear the doorbell. I don't know that there are a lot of people that stop by, but he's not able to hear that. Maybe he takes the hearing aid out, things along those lines. But he's not able to hear the doorbell, so they built him a visual doorbell. And it's done with a capacitive sensor that sits on the ground that can either be stepped on or wheelchaired over if he lives in a retirement home. So if somebody else stops by, a walker can be placed on it or a wheelchair, and then inside the room, the apartment, or whatever it is, inside 2 LEDs light up, very bright LEDs, and they're kind of magnified through a little prism. They light up, and there's a little fan that's kind of near him that begins to blow. So if he's snoozing, then all of a sudden there's kind of this gentle breath of fresh air that happens right near him. So it's again, my way of handling, or my way of working with STEM is looking for real problems and real solutions, or even hypothetical problems, but looking for real solutions.
Well, let me bring up something really quick. So we're talking about the technical classes going away, and now it's all kind of coming back within the umbrella of STEM. The reason why, at least in my previous district, when I was in public school, and I was actually that same district, I grew up in that same district, they got rid of their technical classes because they were more of a college prep. They were pushing college onto these kids, right? And so my question is, if we are now saying, incorporating STEM into this curriculum that no longer really emphasizes this technical education, are we secretly having kids be like, hey, these professions still aren't in existence, we want that technical education without giving you the technical degree? Or are we trying to push them more into, hey, go to Georgia Tech, go to MIT, become engineers and computer scientists, as opposed to, mechanical or a mechanic or something like that? Like, is that something wrong with STEM?
No, in fact, I would argue that helps STEM kind of be naturally differentiated. You have to really look at the workforce. We can have, I think, the erroneous tendency to consider that STEM is preparing everyone for a Georgia Tech or an MIT or some type of aerospace engineering program, and I would argue that it isn't, because if you look at the workforce and what the needs are going to be, they're probably not in those upper-level science, the higher scientist kind of positions. They're actually going to be in very, very skilled craftsmen. And that's what we need a lot of right now, is not necessarily the MIT or the Georgia Tech trained aerospace engineer. What we need is somebody that's able to determine whether an airplane wing has reached the level of smooth that it needs to, has the level of incline. In fact, we were fortunate to get the opportunity to tour the Boeing factory in North Charleston, South Carolina. It's a neat program. If any of your viewers are watching from South Carolina, I've got to get my dates in there for next year, so don't steal my dates. But if you're interested, it's called the Boeing Dream Learners Tour. It's free. You just got to get yourself to North Charleston, and it's a 2.5-hour program. And the room that you're in, and bear in mind, in North Charleston at the Boeing factory, they make the Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft, and they make a lot of them. And the room that you're in overlooks the entire factory floor. So what I saw is I saw some engineers in cubicles, and we met some engineers, but what I saw were a lot of hardworking craftsmen that were doing the hard work of interacting with, robotics and interacting with, high complexity machinery, and building a very complicated aircraft and attaching engines and things along those lines. So I would argue that STEM is naturally differentiated, that if somebody wants to be the aerospace engineer and design the next 787 Dreamliner, that's certainly a plausible opportunity. But I would also argue that if somebody's interested in maybe pursuing a technical education or work out of high school, the majority of the folks that Boeing is going to hire in the next 10, 15, 20 years won't be degreed engineers. They'll be skilled craftsmen that they put through a complex training program, very high degree of pay and a very, very good life quality as possible. By no means am I stumping for Boeing, just an opportunity to hear about that opportunity and potentially push kids towards that as a career path.
Well, I think the piece that when you were talking about leaving out the E and you hit the science and the math, I will be honest, I probably am the one on this panel that I'm not interested in this maker movement in like the least bit. Like there's nothing about it that appeals to me. Like I wasn't a kid that was interested in science. I hated science. I hated math. Like growing up, these were the subjects that literally were, I mean, I made a college major decision based on the level of math courses I was going to have to take. I'm not, I'm not even joking about that. So for me, and I have a son that literally, he's going to love this maker movement. It's going to be his thing. Like, he's stalking Minecraft blogs right now.
That's awesome.
He was waiting for that update on the 10th that didn't come out, and he's now stalking blogs and talking about these dimensions. And, like, I'm like, how did I get this kid? Exactly. But so for me, I very much fall into the technology piece of STEM, and that is where my strength lies. And so I spoke at the West Georgia STEM conference in, I guess, the spring, and I was a little bit nervous because that's not my normal conference. That's not my normal piece. And so I was a little nervous, and so I actually sat in on the keynotes, which, interestingly enough, Chris, were students. And they were students who were in really dynamic STEM programs who were heading off to, I think one was going to MIT and one maybe Yale, perhaps. But they were talking about their program in STEM. And so as I was listening to them talk, I was trying to pull out where they were hitting any elements of technology. They were talking about everything they had done. They were talking about the passion behind it and the planning. And I was just waiting. And eventually they said, you know, we use the whiteboards to design the, you know, the plans. And so in everything they said, the technology piece that they were hitting was using interactive whiteboards for their prototypes. That's the technology they were using. And so I kind of went, whew, okay, so I'm good here. I'm solid. I have a role. But it was interesting because I had lots of people in my session that I think I was leading them down a whole different path, because much of what the kids were saying about their journey through STEM was all the little mistakes they made to get to their successes. And so what I was trying to get across to them was, how are we using digital tools to get them to articulate their thought processes? And specifically the boy that spoke said that his biggest struggle in his STEM program was his inability to be, he could see what he wanted to do, but he wasn't able to lead a team effectively to run through what he needed to have done, and he needed to have in the inner workings in order to take their project and present it. So his biggest struggle was this language arts-based piece, which was communication and collaboration of being able to lead a team into making something they could go and compete with. And so what I tried to bring to that conference was this idea that digital tools are fabulous for being able to build, obviously, all the STEM elements, period, but then the language arts pieces that allow them to learn how to, if they're going to do a prototype and they're going to lead a team, that there's so many digital tools out there for them to be able to get that out and down digitally before they're actually leading these teams into, you know, their competitions. And so what do you see as the technology piece of STEM in middle school, but in the grand retrospect, what do you see technology, the role of technology really being?
Well, first I want to support what you said. It's absolutely critical that kids understand, we're parents, right? It's not uncommon, you know, for me to see the kid, you know, kind of constantly doing this, and, you know, you want to yank that device out of the hand and say that, you know, there are really great people here, talk to them, but then I realize that I'm as guilty. So, you know, that's certainly, I think, something that's going to become more and more prevalent is we grew up, I'm older than most of you, but, you know, we grew up before this. We grew up where you had to be a person first. In the words of you know, comedian Louis C.K., where, you know, you didn't know, there wasn't anything to do. You got to just sit in the doctor's waiting room and read the magazines that have been there for ages, and you know, withdraw inside one's head. And I'm not knocking current, because, you know, I'm as technologically savvy as maybe the next guy, but I think that's going to be an interesting societal question coming up. Now, to your direct question of what is the role of technology in STEM? And that's why I'm somewhat fearful of the STEM moniker, because there's sort of this, STEM programs can be very science and math heavy, which tend to lead well towards an engineering program. I would argue that T is often manifests in several ways. One, it can manifest for kids that are interested in information or network security, for example. These are the kids that are tearing computers apart and they're rebuilding them and they're upgrading them, and these are the kids. I love it when I see a school that has a SWAT team, right? Students willing to assist with technology. I love situations like that where kids are the ones that teachers are calling on, and where there's that culture of inclusion of their voices, and particularly their help. But one of the things that we do to address the T, and I don't do this from an obligation to address the T, but rather from a personal and philosophical desire to, is we actually have old computers that we get the chance to tear apart, and we look through and we say, what is a processor, and how does this all physically fit together, and what do the inner workings look like? And we have what are called broke stuff days, and I let kids bring in their broke stuff, and they bring in everything from broken cell phones.
That's awesome.
To, you name it. We've had broken Beats headphones, we've had broken iPods, we've had all kinds of broken stuff, and the rule is whoever brings it takes it apart. And we have our kind of come to Harkness table, which becomes our robotics arena later on. So we sit at our come to Harkness table, and we take stuff apart. Sometimes it'll be 2 or 3 kids at a time, and other kids are gathered around. We get to see what the inner workings look like, and I get to provide a little level of guidance, because I recognize what a battery inside the iPod looks like, and I recognize what a transistor looks like, and we talk about what a capacitor is. And, I'm a huge fan of just-in-time learning. Mm-hmm. So I can tend to provide that, but it also gives us the opportunity to say, hey, I actually don't know what that is. Let's see if there's an iFixit on it, or let's see if there's a YouTube on how to fix this, or let's take a look. And we just kind of go down that little, and sometimes we don't get the opportunity to do that. And I say, hey, listen, I really want to learn this. Would you please figure this out tonight when you get home, and then would you please teach us when you come back to class?
Chris, one of my best stories.
Go ahead, Amy.
Sorry. One of my best stories from last year when I was still at middle school, I was teaching Read 180, so remedial readers. I had this kid that didn't lift a finger all year long, was bored with class. I was bored with the class, so I didn't blame him one bit. But at the end of the year, I was teaching CEP 811 for MSU, and the whole premise of that is all the maker stuff right now. And so I had my kits, and I had my makey, and I had my little bits, and I had my squishy circuits, and I brought them all in, and we played. The kid says, Miss Petrowski, can you get one of those lights that blinks? I said, I don't know, let's look it up. So we looked it up, and I could find it at Radio Shack. So I went out and spent my $3 on this little blinky light, and he said, can I take this home? I said, yeah, go for it. He took it home, and he came back, and he had rewired his whole PlayStation controller so that when you press that little light in the middle, it went blinky blinky, and it was so exciting because, all of a sudden at the end of his 8th grade year, he was actually interested in something. So it's so neat that you get to provide those experiences on a daily basis for kids, because I think that, especially the way we do things here in our county, we are doing just huge service to kids. We're putting them in remedial math and remedial reading. And so there goes all their specials, and they're not getting these opportunities to put their hands on things, which is really what a lot of kids need.
So I had a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go right ahead, because I'm about to be negative Nancy. You go first.
Oh, no. Okay. So there's several questions, because, Chris, you touched on so many things. One was, it's great that you can kind of be their guider through this process, and I'm assuming your class is more of an elective. Like, are they getting any kind of credits toward a science for this class?
No.
Okay, so we just did a STEAM activity in our interdisciplinary math science project, which was really cool. The kids did get to make, like, catapults, and they were, trying to take some visual data, and they were, measuring it, and I taught them all kind of cool things to do with stopping their filming and, annotating it and so forth. which is another way you can get that technology in there, Jamie. It can be, you know, social media. It could be collaboration. Like, there's so many ways to bring in the technology that's not necessarily programming. However, one of the areas that we failed up in was we did not really teach engineering. Like, we told the kids to go out there and build something, but none of us really knew how to teach them the steps or the process of building. And it was difficult. And so do you have any resources for teachers in that area? Since there aren't any, you know, we don't have shop teachers that love it. But, you know, it would have been great to have someone with that expertise to kind of talk the kids through all the materials that they could have used and, you know, how you properly put something together to get like a, you know, good flexibility or good range of motion, like those kind of things. So do you have any resources for that or good places to start for those teachers who want to teach engineering but don't know where to start?
Yeah, and it's worth noting, I think the majority of us are not engineers. You know, my bachelor's is in Spanish. I have an MEd in ed tech, and I have a PhD in educational psychology and research. There's no engineering in my background either. So I recognize the challenge, and by no means do I think I do engineering well. And I also want to clarify, I think we've used STEM and the maker movement as being somewhat synonymous, and I don't know that they are. They just kind of have become for me. So in my experience, I just have kind of meshed the two, but I wanted to be clear and faithful to kind of both camps. That's just kind of my vision for STEM. But to answer your direct question, people are always the best resource. And here's what I've figured out. I've figured out there are really smart people at really great universities that are just begging for an opportunity like this. Let me give you an example. My kids earlier this year got really fired up about quadcopters. We watched this TED Talk from an Italian scientist who could make quadcopters do things that I've seen circus animals do. I mean, it was really, really neat. And that's one of the things that I do is I find cool stuff that I geek out with a bunch, and then I just show it to my kids, and I just geek out with them. So, and then I do that as a way to kind of bait them to see where their interests and passions are going to lie. So there were some kids that were really fired up about drone technology. So we began talking through that, and we began exploring it, and we got a quadcopter, and we began learning to fly, and of all of this neat stuff. And then I said, you know what, I am so out of my element here, because the next thing they wanted to do is figure out how to engineer one and build one. I said, well, I know nothing about this. Let me find somebody who does. So I reached out to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which is, of course, in Florida, one of the nation's top aeronautical universities, if not the. And it turns out, sure enough, they have a director. Now, drone is apparently a bad word because of the political connotation. We hear that on the news so much. So the preferred term, and who knew, is unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV. So I said, awesome. They have a director of a UAV program. And we did a live conference with him, and he gave us this great presentation with all these videos and talked to the kids about what it's like. They hold UAV competitions and all. I mean, it was absolutely marvelous. Gentleman's name is Richard Stansberry at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. We're so fortunate to get the opportunity to talk to him. But so my answer to you would be there are resources available at local universities. Find an engineering university. Here in South Carolina, of course, we've got University of South Carolina, we've got Clemson. Both have some very good local engineering programs. And one of the things that's on tap for me for next year is over the summer, I'm going to have some meetings and conversations with, for example, there's a Society of Women Engineers that meets at USC. They're going to come out at the very early part of next year and do a hands-on something with my kids for a couple of days. And the neat part about that is I get to learn also. So for somebody that's not familiar with engineering, begin looking around. Find an engineering university that's near you, because those kids, directly tied into what Jamie said a little while ago, those kids are clamoring for opportunities to work on their verbal, their social, their teaching skills. And I have found that university students and faculty are super willing to come talk to us, or they host engineering days, or they, this level of interaction, because they're trying to perpetuate their university and, train up a bunch of future engineers. And there are so many different departments. There's chemical engineering and electrical engineering, and there's kind of all of this. So I would reach out to local colleges and universities that specialize in engineering.
Awesome. One last question. Jackie Gerstein, I hope I said that correctly, Gerstein. She made a comment about the Hummingbird Kit and said it was a little pricey, and I'm just wondering if others, like say for instance in public schools who may not have those kind of resources, do you think the prices of those kind of things will drop down? I'm sure they could write grants, but do you have any information or any comments about that?
I don't, because I purchased it personally. That wasn't something, and that's probably a bit of a downfall on my part. Is I buy too much out of my own pocket. That's the common plight of the teacher, right? Years and years and years ago, I used to look forward to the service merchandise catalog, and then when Best Buy first came out, you remember the service merchandise catalog? Come on,
yes.
you're good. I used to read that sucker like it was a Bible. And I would get it, and I would flip through it, and I would look at clock radios, and I would look at watches, and I would look at all this great stuff. And then I would go to service merchandise, and I'd pick the ticket out, and I'd pay the cashier, and I would wait for the greatest moment in a little boy's life, that moment when that cool little conveyor with all the rotating pipes on it, where your box of whatever would come sliding down. It was absolutely the best moment in my world, right? So then Best Buy came along, and I used to go to Best Buy. Now I love Adafruit, ADAFRUIT.com. I love Adafruit. I buy a lot of stuff from Adafruit. So to answer Dr. Gerstein's question, I would argue that we as teachers tend to spend a couple of dollars of our own funds on our classrooms anyway. If something that's pre-made, like a Hummingbird or like a Little Bits, is out of our personal price range or out of our school price range, much of that functionality can be replicated with something inexpensive like an Arduino Uno, or even a smaller one like a Trinket, or Adafruit has a neat wearable one called the Gemma, which is a little tiny one, or they have a Floor, which is a little larger one. So I would argue that LEDs are very inexpensive. Radio Shack has a neat DIY page. I think it's RadioShackDIY.com. It has lots of neat little
DIY
projects.
section too.
Say that again?
So they have a pretty decent DIY section with some kits.
They do.
Into the store.
Correct. And they have project instructions on their webpage that lists all of their catalog numbers. So I also have found that local technology companies, here in Columbia we have Intel, we have Boeing in South Carolina. You know, there are lots of opportunities for not just grants, but rather for direct reaching out for funding. And that may be something to address and something to explore in the particular area in which a teacher that, the school or district is low on funds for this type of program is.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Not to be negative, however.
When you start like that.
Well, okay, look, I'm realistic, and I've studied a lot regarding the history of education, particularly in American culture. And I see a lot of things come back around. I've always said that American culture, American education is just a pendulum. We swing back and forth and back and forth. You know, we had A Nation at Risk. We had No Child Left Behind. It just goes back and forth. I believe that we are repeating history right now. So, October 4th, 1957, what happened? Go.
Brown versus the Board of Education?
No, guys, history lesson.
Good guess, Amy. Good job.
Yes.
I'm an elementary educator. We just make people feel good about their answers.
Oh, October 4th, 1957, that was the launch of Sputnik.
Secondary people.
Oh, yeah.
Russia launched Sputnik. Meanwhile, America was trying to launch their own spy satellites, the Vanguard project, which epically failed. So 2 years later, I believe it was September 2nd, 1958, the National Defense Education Act came out, and that essentially pushed science, engineering, technology, and math education. It actually gave funding to students who were interested in pursuing that. And Sputnik at the same time was also kind of ruining the perception of education as well. So that's a whole other topic for another time. But it was the National Defense Student Loan that students could actually receive to go to college and have funding if they were interested in working for defense-oriented I can't even speak English right now. Sorry, you got me thinking about Spanish. Professions. Thank you so much. I was about to say it in Spanish. Sorry, Chris. But we are back there again, and I think that's why it's so funny that you're talking about, defense. You're talking about, drones and whatnot, and how it kind of relates to what you were able to bring that into your classroom. I am looking at the STEM movement, and I am just seeing Sputnik all over again, where we are pushing kids into, Jamie, you talked about the 2 kids who spoke. They're going to Yale and MIT. It's another example of the kids who are not going to go on that track, who should be getting STEM exposure, who are not getting it because they are not the kids who are going to go into those positions and perhaps make some big discovery to, I don't know, push America forward into the future. So for me, while I love the fact, Chris, that you actually have a class, so kids of any variety of talent and age would be able to be exposed to STEM. What I am seeing is the kids exposed to STEM are the ones that are above average, who are really going to go to these places and be scientists and be engineers, not the kid who's like the history major. They're not getting that, and it's just Sputnik to me all over again.
And I think that's why I would agree with, back to Jake's, I would agree with the notion of an integrated maker culture in a school, and I would also potentially expand on that a bit or extrapolate on it and say that there probably needs to be an integrated STEM throughout the entire curriculum. Let's back up for a second.
Sure.
You've been teaching for how long?
9 years.
Okay, this is my 8th year, so we've been teaching roughly the same amount of time. I think I'm a little older than you. Would you agree with me that teaching is way more technological than you might have anticipated?
I think it has become way more technological. I think that when I began teaching, all it was me and a whiteboard, and I was a great teacher without it. And that's coming from someone who's getting a doctorate in educational technology, guys. I did not need the technology to be an amazing teacher. I think it enables me to be a better teacher. I am a fabulous teacher now because of what I can do with technology. I think that it is becoming more of a technological profession, especially now that social media. I started when social media wasn't big. LiveJournal was big then. MySpace was big then. Now we have mobile phones. We have all these things. The iPod was just coming out when I started. So it's changing, definitely. It's definitely changing.
Okay.
Yahoo Messenger was big when I started teaching. I said Yahoo Messenger was big when I started teaching.
So you agree with me that teaching is becoming more technological?
Definitely.
Okay. No disagreement that you were fantastic before and are fantastic now. That it wasn't about that.
Oh, yeah.
Would you also agree with me that most other professions are probably traveling down this road of an increased technological capacity as well?
In
Yes.
order to reach their customer base, yes.
Okay. A couple of years ago, I got to tour a local factory where they make parts for diesel engines.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking through, and something a guy said, I'll never forget. He said, we don't need people to make the parts, robots do that. What we need now is guys to fix the machines when they break, and we need folks to think critically about the process to find areas to make it more efficient.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, so if that's true, so if we're in agreement that teaching is becoming more technological, if we're agreeing that manufacturing is becoming more technological, if we're in agreement that our world, our society in general is becoming more technological, I would argue that providing kids, and I would agree that it should be all, that if we integrate a STEM culture or a maker culture, a STEAM culture into all of our areas of curriculum, as opposed to an isolated, I almost feel like sometimes I'm doing a disservice because if they're only getting, now this is not the case in my world, but let's just take it up in my school, but let's just take it apart. You know, if kids are only getting exposure to STEM in my world, that's like them only getting exposure to a computer in a computer lab. We wouldn't agree with that either. You know, we want an integrated culture of computing. We want an integrated culture of making, one of STEM. So I would argue that if what you're saying is STEM is potentially a fad, maybe, but I would argue that these skills whether they're taught in conjunction with STEM or just because they need to be curricular in general, I'd argue there's nothing wrong with learning these skills, because learning how to think critically about a real-world problem and creating a real-world solution, like, that's a life skill. Being able to take something electronic apart and figure out where the problem is, being able to use a multimeter, being able to solder, being able to create and invent, well, those are life skills that will serve one well, whether we're working with Arduino in 15 years or whether we're working with whatever else is new out there.
I think
Not only that,
we're bad tonight, girl.
you like a panda.
Well, I think you hit it, that we need the acronyms. I mean, at this point, is this absolutely necessary? Regardless of what the acronym is, does it not come down to the instruction that individual children need to have the ability to go on and do what it is that they're passionate about? And so for me, an intro to STEM class probably wouldn't have been something I would have been amazingly passionate about. Or had I been exposed to it in junior high, would that have turned out differently? Perhaps. So I think it just goes back to, are we just over acronyming education to a point in which we're pocketing all of this, and in the end what we need to be saying is we have to differentiate for students, and there are kids who really need these skills, who need to be able to touch and create and manipulate and learn. Are we just acronyming everything to death?
We have to acronym.
Yeah, and I think it's more so for the teachers than the students, because it's all about buy-in at some point,
For the administrators.
Well, them too, but I would take it to say, like, I got teachers who, and this is nothing against the seasoned teachers, who are, like, looking at the calendar waiting to retire. Like, they're not about to start, learning something different. However, that's a disservice to our kids, because you've got to reach the kids where they are.
True.
And I'm finding kids now who their minds are just wired differently from ours. I have kids who are talking about algorithms as it relates to solving Rubik's Cubes. And I'm like, go outside and play. Like, it's just mind-boggling. But that's where they are. And so somehow we've got to get the teachers to be where they are. Or, kind of meet them there. Like Chris said, guide them. Even if you don't know what they're talking about, make some connections. Attempt to do it, because our kids are there. They want to do that. And it's girls, too. It's not just the boys. It's the girls, too.
Oh yeah, but here's the thing though, and I like it. Don't get me wrong. Like, this is something I like to agree with, that we definitely need to have just that integration across the board. But the same thing applies to digital life standards. Like, if you want digital skills that are digital literacy, you want that embedded across the board. But yet here we are saying, oh well, they need a basic computing class. So why can't there be an intro to STEM class? It's the exact same thing. Or are we doing a disservice by saying they have to have a computing class, we should be teaching that in the 6th grade regardless? I know, I'm sorry. Sorry.
I think 6th grade is too late to institute those sort of habits, because, I see 8th graders that go to school next door to me every day, and I'm like, oh, hey, why didn't you do that in a Google Doc? And they're like, what? We don't use Google. I'm like, yes, but you are in the very same school district, and we've had Google for 4 or 5 years now. So, hey, friends, it has to be part of your culture starting at a young age.
Yeah.
It can't just be introduced at middle school.
Yeah. And I think this is where private schools have a little bit of an advantage, because, say, for instance, at Lovett, we try to meet across the divisions, and so we can say, hey, if you're teaching this in 3rd grade, 4th grade, then we can do this in the 6th grade, So I get that, Amy, but I guess like in some public schools where there's not that conversation happening from elementary to middle, then 6th grade might be the place where you kind of have to get everybody on an even playing field. Even if it's late for some, it's an introduction for others.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then you just blew my mind, because you were talking about Kat, an intro to STEM class. Oh, I would love that, but then you open up another can of worms of scheduling. and overscheduling kids, and then, you know, fine arts versus the technologies, and it's just a big old blah, 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 blah.
Then
And
what if we got rid of scheduling? What if we had a whole thing, like, just threw it out the window? There's so many things.
I want to see that, school cat.
Stop, Cat, because now you're going back to the late 70s when they had the open concept classrooms.
Yes, I did. It's like I'm telling you, it's one big pendulum. I'm telling you. But
I think it's an experiment.
You think it's more of an experiment? But is it right? Is it right to? Okay, I am so sorry to say this. Is it right to experiment on our nation's children?
But we don't know obviously I'm in a program where I'm constantly looking back at researchers of the last 30 years.
I know.
And I'm like, well, if they knew it 30 years ago, shouldn't we be doing it like right now? No, we're still talking about what they were researching 30 years ago.
No, Chris, you understand,
so
Chris.
We don't have a choice. We have to do what we think is best, and
I know.
Yeah,
Well,
and the question is, what's the alternative?
What is the alternative? Like, I would love to hear. Do you have an idea at all, Crafty?
No.
We'll launch it right here, right now.
No, I don't know that I do. That's the point. What's the alternative? It's, you know, stagnation is certainly not rewarded in education. As we learn, but this is the way life is. There's a natural ebb and flow. You know, and this is the case for every industry, at least ones that don't stagnate. You know, manufacturing, in order to keep up, has, you know, gone very automated. And, as new machines are created, they find ways to implement those new machines. And they make their processes more efficient. So is education, at least in theory. You know, there's so much great work and research being done, and in theory, we're learning more and more about how we learn, and more about our brains, and, you know, more about the physical aspect, more about education in general, and hopefully we're monitoring and adjusting accordingly, just like professionals do. You know, how often do you see an advertisement for new medication? You know, that's
my gosh, yes.
Research and development, or a new machine to do, you know, some surgery with less downtime. You know, new technology affects, or let's just say new research and new learning affects every industry. Hopefully it affects ours as well. So stagnation's not an option. I think there's just a natural opportunity for us to move forward as we learn more.
So would you think that the best way for us to start integrating, and I do believe this, by the way, for digital literacy standards, the best way to start integrating any sort of across-the-board change is essentially the classroom teacher?
Oh, there's no question in my mind. Typically, these changes are not systemic because they're seen as a, you know, one more thing being kind of forced down. Now I have to do this, and, you know, we've got to move those have-tos to get-tos. And the way that happens is when it comes from a place of personal inquiry and personal curiosity. And we've got to get folks fired up about learning in general, whether they're learning about making or whether they're learning more about their own topic and craft.
Well, this has been enlightening. I almost feel like we need a part 2.
I know.
We need a part 2 of all of our shows. They're just that awesome. I just want to mention a couple of comments that were made on Q&A. Peggy George, who always has great things to say, agreed with you, Kat. Sputnik changed everything for American education. Thank you, Dr. Gerstein, who says the difference now is that we're in a perfect storm of open source materials, 3D affordable printers, LCDs that cost pennies, teachers and students freely sharing resources. It is about self-sufficiency, do-it-yourself, creating one's own good. And then there were just some shout-outs from Jeff Bradbury, who looks forward to seeing all of us at ISTE. You too, Mr.
Jeff.
Dr. Kraft, and he calls us his edgy babes.
Edgy babes. The feminist in me raises my eyebrow, but it's Jeff. I'll let it go.
Yeah. Dr. Gerstein also says, and I was thinking the same thing, Dr. Gerstein, education is a constant experiment. For example, CSS. So I agree as well.
We have great comments tonight.
Yeah. Peggy also says we don't have to think that the only way students can learn technology is in an introductory STEM class. Learning is happening everywhere.
That's
so thank you, everyone, for all of those comments.
Good back channelers tonight.
Yeah.
Well, Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us tonight. It has been absolutely amazing to have you back on. And yeah, our first show was all about Google, and it has been great to not talk about it. Just not really, and just to talk about something else, that you're amazing at, and really, help us think deeply about what it really means in education. So hopefully we've broken down STEM for our audience fairly well.
So, Chris, before we go, tell us where you will be going in the near future and how people can find you, follow, and contact you.
Biggest opportunity to see me in person. If you want to shake my hand or just come fuss at me because you don't agree with something I said tonight, I'll be at ISTE, and I'll be there for a good few days. Be hosting a make shop, so if you're interested in that, I'll give you more details as we get a little closer to ISTE. But hit me up on Twitter at Crafty184, CRAFTY 184, or if you're curious to learn more about me in general, please visit ChristopherCraft.com.
And we have our show for next week, which I guess is talking about a whole nother experiment in education. We're talking standards-based grading.
That's not an experiment. That's how they do things in the lower grades.
We're going to have a great discussion, too. So I'm actually inviting a colleague of mine. Her name is Robin Matthews. I'll tweet out her handle in just a little bit. But she has, for the past year, completely integrated standards-based grading into her class with success. So she will be telling you how she does it and what it looks like.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. So thank you again, Chris. Go ahead, Susan. No, you're fine.
Yes. Thanks, Chris. And I always want to say, as a South Carolinian, you just make me so proud because South Carolina gets a bad rap, and look at all the brilliance that's come out of there through you. I just love it.
You too, God. South Carolina misses you, Stacia.
Oh, I'll be driving through soon.
But hey, we're on the southeast. We're on the southeast.
I know. So look, I want to thank our audience for joining us, and please continue the conversation. You'll be able to watch this show soon on our EdReach Network channel and our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us by subscribing to our podcast on iTunes.
And make sure you also are following us on Twitter at EduVue, EduVue. Also, make sure that you follow the EdReach Network at EdReach. Make sure that you do not miss next Monday night at 8:45 when we get to talk about standards-based grading. Night, y'all.
Night,
Night.
Uh-oh.
I can edit this later.
Where's the stop button?
Scroll to the top or scroll to the bottom. This is the after show.
It doesn't say stop broadcast.
Oh, Stacia, it's somewhere on there.
I saw it earlier, I swear.
Chris, welcome to the after show.
Hold on.
We don't actually usually publicize the after show.
I don't want to hang up on everybody, but I'm serious. All I see is the camera.
Well, even if you hang up, I don't know if it'll actually...
It's going to drop us all. Darn Google.
All right, are you scrolling around your mouse and you don't see anything?
Yeah.
Are you on Windows?
No, I'm on my Mac.
Disaster.
All right, hold on.
All right, why don't you hang up and see what it does?
All right.
This is experimentation. This is what we do in our classes. It's
We're
still going.
live.
Okay, let me... Okay.
Well, that's fun.
I will be right back, and I'm going to log in as EduVue, and I will fix this. You guys, 3 of y'all, have fun. Talk amongst yourselves.
So with all these Google certified teachers, we really should have an answer for this.
Hey, a quick thought for part 2, if you decide to do a part 2 of STEM. Instead of being, tonight was so very philosophical, it'd be kind of cool